Welcome everyone. Today we have our very important session. We have debate. Our debate topic: all people should have universal basic income, and we have our world famous debater, Professor Rob and Professor Donald. And it's an open debate, uh, and speakers can go for two round debate. One round is constructive speech, and second round for uh, like rebuttals and closing remarks. First, I would like to give chance Professor Rob Enderly.
All right, universal basic income. Not to be confused with general basic income or reverse taxation. The universal basic income promises that every person that is identified in the program receives the same amount of money. Now, there are variants that suggest that maybe that amount of money should be different for certain geographic areas. So, for instance, if you've got people that are living in a city with a higher cost of living, people living in a country with a lower cost of living, maybe universal basic income should be altered for those two groups. I'm not a fan of that because I think it creates suboptimization for the program. But it showcases there are different thoughts surrounding how you do it. General basic income, in contrast, is one where you selectively use the income for individual groups. So if you've got a minority group that's underpaid, you provide them with income. If you single women with children might be a group that you'd provide income with, but it wouldn't be for anybody. And then you've got reverse taxation, where you have a tax floor, and then below that tax floor, people receive money at an escalating amount, as opposed to pay money at an escalating amount as you make more money. That's interesting because you can use your existing tax authority to handle the program. But as we've discovered in the past, and there was a recent case in the United States with welfare, whenever you make programs like this selective, there are opportunities for abuse, and those opportunities are significant. The program I'm talking about was in the Pennsylvania, but where they'd received $70 million of welfare money from the federal government and spent $60 million of that money on mansions, first class airfare, and a gym for volleyballers. And the people that were supposed to get the money, many women of color with children, were told there was no money for them because the program had run out. That's problematic, but it is not an uncommon event in selective programs. The people administering the selective programs often self-deal, and it introduces graft, bribery, and outright fraud. So the advantage to universal basic income is it's simple. It's as noted universal, and if the money is kept flat across the groups, it does create what is potentially a forcing function for areas that are more lucrative and higher cost of living to raise salaries in order to bring workers in. Because what universal basic income does is it provides freedom for people to make choices, and it deals with some historical problems with regard to jobs that are traditionally unpaid but very important. For instance, mothers taking care of children. That's an unpaid position, but yet critical to the future of the nation. We want the mothers to be able to protect themselves if their spouse dies, to be able to support themselves, and we don't want the child to be disadvantaged because the mother has to work. That's an area where UBI could work. Now, granted, as I mentioned, welfare programs can do some of the same thing, but then you have to qualify, and the qualification process can often be discriminatory, particularly against those people that most need the program. So what UBI does is it removes the stress of worrying about being homeless. It removes the stress of worrying about being unemployed. And it solves an equity problem between men and women, particularly women with children at home who are serving as homemakers, and certainly could allow for stronger reversal where women work and men could stay home and take care of the kids, and they would also have that basic income, allowing them the independence. Recognize that when you have an inequity like that in a family, the captured member, the member that is not earning money, is effectively restricted from movement. If they move or divorce or leave the family unit, they'll have to go to court to get alimony, child support, And during that period of time, that they're going to be in stress and at risk, and so they're going to be less willing to make the move that they may need to make if the environment is abusive or unhealthy for them or the child. So what UBI does is it creates a higher degree of equity between the parties. Now, we have to be sure with a program like this, we don't start mucking stuff up. Politics, mucking things up is kind of what we do, and avoiding that is something that we should focus on. So, for instance, this is not an economic incentive program. This is not a program that's supposed to get the economy back on its feet. This isn't the kind of program that we did to try to fix the problems associated with people not buying during the pandemic. Those programs should, by nature, be short-run and targeted. If we try to combine the two, we include a lot of complexity, and we likely make the program unsustainable. So those two efforts should remain separate. This program is to create equity and to reduce problems like homelessness, underemployment, and people just being unable to afford the basic needs of life. They would, by nature, reduce the need for programs like welfare. They would reduce the need for homeless programs. They would reduce the need for other programs that are attempting to fill this gap of people being unable to have a basic wage. Now, there are some concerns about the fact that if you go down the UBI right, universal basic income right, that you are unfairly benefiting those that are wealthy, because everybody gets UBI. You don't have to qualify for it. But think of UBI for the wealthy as just simply being a deduction, that they'll be paying more into the program than they'll be getting out, because they have to cover the people that aren't paying taxes as well. And so what you're doing is saying, yeah, it may be a little bit unreasonable to give the wealthy this payment, but that's in exchange for not having to deal with the massive complexity of having people qualify for the payment and the abuse those programs have had in the past. So it reduces economic overhead. And it also reduces the chance for abuse and chance and opportunity for abuse and for illicit behavior, which is important, because we've certainly seen with other programs those behaviors tend to run rampant, and the people, as I mentioned earlier, that are supposed to get the money don't, and the people that aren't supposed to get the money do. So this way, we authorize the basic payment for everyone, and by the way, that still works. If you have a wealthy person that loses their wealth, they still have that soft landing. The program can't be overfunded. I mean, there is a real concern that if you overfund the program, which I don't believe we've ever done with a program like this, but in case we ever were to overfund it, it would form a disincentive for work. So the program and monetary level needs to be set and modeled on the idea that people still will need to work to gain status. This is to cover the basics. This is not to cover your luxury cars, and if people are driving around in Teslas that are on UBI and that's the only income they've got. We've clearly got a problem. Most of the tests, and we support most of the programs that are currently in place that are in test and trial. There are programs in trial in Finland and a number of other countries looking for just where the gore points are with regard to how much money you provide and the nature of that provision. Any government should do the same. Do a limited program first, see how it works, use that to adjust the parameters, and as it is successful, expand the program more broadly. This is not a program you want to roll out nationally all at once, because we don't know what the consequential damages of the program are, and until we do, we don't want to experience them at scale. We want to experience them at low levels. The programs I'm aware of that are in trial are both testing amounts of money and always run against a test group of a group of folks that aren't getting the money to make comparisons in terms of quality of life, willingness to work, and overall program cost. And many of those have been running since the 1970s. And can provide a great deal of information that we can learn from in terms of putting in our own program. So pro UBI, but with the caveat of doing heavy trials first to make sure that the monetary amounts and administration is adequate, and that the focus remains on correcting an inequity in the environment that unfairly penalizes people that either are unable to get employment or are in a job that typically is not compensated like a mother taking care of her children.
Thank you, Professor Rob. Now I request Professor Donald.
Well, I really appreciate what Rob said. Um, I'm going to kind of add to what he said. UBI doesn't necessarily, in the experiments that have been tried, provide enough money to completely um, subsidize people's lifestyle. They've been trying it in different kinds of ways with smaller amounts of money. Like there's been some experiments where they give people $1,000 a month or $2,000, $500 a month. So it's been tried in quite a few places. It's been tried in half a dozen places in the United States. There's an experiment going on right now in Stockton, California, and and there's interesting experiment in Canada, and there and the results that they get are that school attendance increases. They have less visits to. Their health improves. They have less visits to emergency rooms and chronic health problems. I suppose that's because they can, now they can afford um, like annual health checkups and the kind of medicine. Like my wife is a primary care nurse practitioner, and she said probably 90% of her patients have diabetes, and they're in order to manage diabetes, you have to take medicine every single solitary day, and if you can't afford that medicine, the consequences are pretty darn serious. And and if you get to the point where you're having to treat the consequences of diabetes, it's much, much more expensive than treating the diabetes itself. But if you don't have the money to do it, well, you're SOL, as we say in America here. Um, so the universal basic income helps with that. Now, another thing that Rob didn't mention, but I know is knowing him, I know it's in the back of his mind, is that um, people use it to start businesses, which is an amazing thing. The way that the United States is sort of organized is that many people, the large majority of people, are paid just enough to survive, and 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 they also get their health insurance through the company that they work for. So if they leave the company that they work for and become independent, they don't. It's a very risky thing to do because um, the health insurance for a 50-year-old in the United States is probably I can actually tell you that it goes up to like as high as $10,000 a month. It's outrageous. You can't even no, $10,000 a year. Sorry about that, but it's outrageous. It's $1,000. It's $1,000 a month basically. So you're just and that's just out of your pocket every month just for the health insurance. And so you're kind of locked into working for companies. And I think that this is it's people know this. I don't say that there's a conspiracy to make this happen or anything else like that, but it's the system that we've got. If you have universal basic income, this gives people flexibility to be able to start having a cushion so that if they want to stop doing what they're doing and create a business, then they'll be able to do it. It allows people that even if you don't give them enough money to completely subsidize their life, somebody who's working at a lower wage job, even a minimum wage job, has absolutely no possibility of saving enough money to make a leap to do anything. But if you start giving them an extra $1,000, $2,000 a month every month, all of a sudden they do. And so universal basic income works across the board. And the savings are, there's kind of two aspects for it. One is some people put in the comments, I think that's totally reasonable, is that the other, and Rob mentioned this, is that other welfare costs and other various costs go down. So the money for that can be used for the universal basic income. If you, I think it could interact with Social Security in a way that we could, I don't think it's a good idea to take things away from people to give people universal basic income. But I saw this wonderful video on TikTok the other day that was very well done and very amusing. And it said, look what happens if we give $20,000, or I think it was in England, or 20,000 pounds to 5 people. One of them is a student for their loans. One of them was a housewife. One of them was a small business person, and so on, just regular people. And look at what happens. Well, the small business person goes to the other people in his community and he buys this stuff that he needs for his store. And then they have more money, so they go to the restaurants and they buy stuff. And the woman that has the house goes shopping at the store and she buys things at the store. And because of that, they buy stuff. And it goes through this whole thing where people are added, spending their money with each other, and it grows and grows. And then they say, now let's ask the billionaire. And the billionaire, they walk up to him and they say, well, how many jobs did you create? I mean, how much economic activity did you create with the 20,000 pounds? And he goes, oh, I completely forgot about it. And he pulls the check out of his suit coat pocket and he looks at it and goes, yeah, there, it's right there. She said, well, what are you going to do with it? And he says, well, I don't know. I guess I'm just going to send it to the Cayman Islands with the rest of it. And she says, well, could I have it back? And he just goes, smirk. and I think that even though it isn't, as Rob pointed out, it isn't really something that you'd want to do as basically a solution to an economic problem like a recession or something like that. It would be something that would be a way of basically balancing out the economy and making sure that the money that exists in society, I mean, there's a finite amount of dollars. The Federal Reserve tries to maintain that. We try and keep a finite amount of dollars, and it would make sure that finite amount of dollars wasn't just sitting in bank accounts in the Cayman Islands, that it was actually in our society, going from person to person and making things a better place. And that's an aspect of it that I think is critical and important. And I know there's objections to it, and in the next go around, I'll talk about that.
Thank you. Now I request Professor Rob for rebuttal.
Well, we're both kind of agreeing with each other, so I'm not sure a rebuttal's going to work. In effect, we're rebutting ourselves.
Right.
So the downside to any government funding program is, of course, governments tend to be inefficient. So there'll be a certain amount of the program that's going to go to administration, and governments aren't exactly the most efficient at distribution. It is a costly program. There is no doubt the program is incredibly costly, and it's potentially inflationary. The money you're putting into the program is going to go to people that are going to spend it. They're below the poverty line. That means that this money probably isn't going to go into savings someplace. They're going to spend it because they need to spend it. Now, in a lot of cases, the money would probably be spent anyway, either coming in through welfare or some alternative program for some of those folks. But a lot of those folks aren't getting the money now, even though they're qualified to get it. So there would be more money put into the system to buy things, and it would probably result in higher prices for certain commodities. And for areas where substance abuse is significant, some of that money is going to go for illicit purposes. It's no way. It's like any money is going to happen that way. Once you give somebody a check, you really have no control, nor should you want to have control over those funds. And so by putting more money into the hands of people that often have difficulties determining how to spend that money, you're going to have problems. The offset for that, and I think this should be a requirement for anybody putting in place a program, is expanding education with regard to both countering substance abuse, alcoholism, I should say both, alcoholism, and just basic financial skills. If you can teach people how to manage their money better, you can make that money go farther, and that way with a lower payment you can accomplish more of what it is you want to accomplish, and that you don't grow problems in the process. You don't have folks that are using this money extensively for illicit purposes or just misspending it. They take their entire check and they send it to a mega church or some other scam artist that's attempting to take the money from them. Send me your check and I'll make you a billionaire. Probably not going to happen. But so part of the program should be a focus on education that we don't really have right now, on the basics of savings, the basics of prudent purchasing, and certainly help with access to lower cost facilities, areas and stores that sell things for less. Existing government programs in the United States, they have the government cheese program that deals with excess cheese, that allows them to buy things at lower prices and stay within their underlying budgets. And and there may be an argument to say that maybe certain people could be removed from the program for abuse. I'm not a fan of that, because once you get into the place of adding or removing people from the program, you actually introduce a potential for abuse, and I think one overrides the other. But that certainly would be an alternative. One of the areas that the U.S. was looking at was just providing a guaranteed basic income for folks like reformed felons, because often what happens is when people come out of prison, they can't get a job because they're a felon, and so they return to crime, and a targeted program against them, which is what we're not necessarily talking about here, but would be an alternative, has shown that allows them to continue to function. They're not as likely to go back into criminal behavior or create problems with society, and it gives them much more time to find other things they can do, maybe lower paying jobs to enhance the UBI, but allow them to be productive, as opposed to right now where it's almost coming out of prisons, it's almost a forcing function to return people to criminal behavior, which is counterproductive. By the way, the state where they had the major problem with welfare was Mississippi, and it was significant. They even went so far as the auditor that came in and caught all this stuff, when they found that the governor was involved, got fired. But he's still active and certainly talking to the media, which kind of showcases it's free speech remains important in society today. In terms of the testing that's going on, the test you might want to take a hard look at is the largest one, at least the largest one I know of, which was in Kenya. It involved 20,000 people. It's a 12-year test, and the variants were they either monthly payments, large lump sum payments, and then they had a control group that got no payments, and they're trying to look at the underlying behavior. It looks early on like the people that got the big lump sum payments were more likely to use it to start businesses and do things like that, but they could also had a higher propensity to be run out of the money and be back in distress again. The people that got the monthly payments were less likely to start businesses or make big economic decisions. On the other hand, they didn't seem to run out of money or drop back into poverty. So it kind of depends on the underlying goals of the program. But it's these kinds of studies that tell you, not only the amount of money that should be in the program, but how you dispense that money to elicit the behavior that you want to elicit out of your population. Like anything else, UBI is an incentive program, or can be used as an incentive program to force certain kinds of behavior. Depending on how you implement it. Once again, even if you implement it consistently, whether you do it monthly or in bulk, and whether you increase it or provide it for children, because when does UBI kick off? Does UBI kick off when somebody becomes an adult, or does UBI kick off when they become a citizen, or does UBI kick off when you determine life? In the United States, we just made some screwy decision that babies in wombs are citizens. Well, if that's the case, should they not then receive UBI if it was citizen-based? And then what are the rules with becoming citizens? What if somebody comes into the country as an immigrant? You've got the same problems with them consuming resources. They're not a citizen. If UBI is citizenship tied, they wouldn't receive the money, and therefore they would again become an additional burden on society, or a group of folks that were disenfranchised, which would be problematic. So those kinds of things would all need to be decided as the program is run out. And clearly, from a political standpoint, providing UBI to immigrants would be problematic. It would not be a popular concept for people paying taxes to pay a universal basic income for people that aren't even citizens. But then again, if citizenship is something that is naturally applied to people when they have a heartbeat, then do we provide a UBI for unborn children? I'm not proposing one way or the other at this particular point, but it's something that would have to be decided, and it would be, and however you decided, it would undoubtedly be controversial. One of the questions that came in under comments was, what effect would ending all taxation for lower income under $100,000 have? Would it be equivalent? No. Right now, people that don't have an income don't pay taxes already. You don't pay taxes on what you don't get. And those are the people you want to help with UBI. So removing income taxes under the $100,000 would not have an effect. Now, let's be clear. I'm not a fan of income taxes. I think income taxes are stupid. Taxes should be used to fund the government and to control behavior. And when you tax income, you're providing a disincentive to earning income, which I think is just stupid. And as we've seen with income taxes, the wealthier you are, the easier you are to dodge them. And so it actually increases inequity the wealthier you become, and that's a problem as well. So I'm not a huge fan of income taxes, but removing income taxes in this particular case for those earning under $100,000 would certainly increase the spending ability of those folks. But would have zero impact on people that were below the poverty line, and particularly those people that aren't earning a taxable income. And you've got to believe a lot of people that are earning basic wage are probably not aggressively reporting that income, and our Internal Revenue Service is probably not aggressively going after them for back taxes today. So even if you are at these lower levels, there's a pretty good chance they're not taxes. And clearly, if they're not having income, they're paying taxes to begin with. Let's see, if UBI replaced welfare entirely, I suspect it would be lower cost. Yeah, I think it's hard. It's one of the things you need to do with the analysis. If welfare was what it's supposed to be, and truly the safety blanket it was intended, then I do suspect UBI would be cheaper. Welfare isn't that. There are so many people that are disenfranchised and that should be receiving welfare that are not, I suspect that program is and has always been underfunded. And so if UBI was properly funded, it very well might be more expensive. There would be potentially less waste, however, at least administrative waste, because it's cheaper, and certainly a lower probability of the kind of fraud that was reported in Mississippi, where nearly 90% of the money was going for things it wasn't supposed to go for. Universal limited bureaucracy, basic covers minimum expenses, income, no welfare stigma. Yeah, David Schumacher's comment there is correct. The thing is, do recognize that stigma is typically applied by politicians in rhetoric. So while it has no inherent welfare stigma, do realize that people that are arguing against this will tend to attach welfare stigma to it, and perceptions are reality for folks. So it just depends how effective people promoting this are on removing the stigma. It shouldn't have the stigma, but politicians are politicians, and we have to deal with that. Should it be universal, global, or nationalist system? Well, nationalist. By nature, I'm probably using the wrong term, but it is a socialist system. It's just like Medicare and welfare and public transportation and public services and any service that the government pays for is effectively a socialist system. This would be a socialist system. We've got to get over our stigma on socialism. Socialism is not communism, and communism is not socialism. Countries that have heavy socialism, like Finland, are ranked towards the top of best places to live. I would think we would want to use that metric as a way to determine our programs, not some arbitrary word that takes us back to the communist revolution and all the politicians that were killed because they weren't doing their job. I understand the concern, but I just don't think it really applies here. Almost every country has a lot of socialism. Embrace it where it makes sense, reject it where it doesn't. But that's the way the decision should be made. We should be making blanket decisions just because the government funds them. Certain things government does well. Fixing inequity should be one of the things that government does well. Currently, that's not the case. UBI would undoubtedly help government do their job, and that would be stronger. But one of the big negatives is getting UBI approved is probably going to be a nightmare.
Thank you, Professor Rob. Now I request Professor Rana.
Rob always makes great points. I do want to say one thing, that I have always heard that socialism defined as the government owns the means of production. So I've always thought that the VA and a lot of the VA, for an instance, is socialist because the government owns the VA, and which is the hospitals for military and retired military people, and they actually own it, and so therefore it's socialist. I'm not quite sure that universal basic income is socialist. The Finns claim to high heaven that they're not socialist, and they are very, very into their businesses. They're very ruthless, good and fairly ruthless about their businesses. You don't want to mess with them. Finns are tough, and but anyway, that's neither here nor there. That's a very fun other discussion. One of the biggest arguments against universal basic income, and if we have a colleague that if he was here would make it immediately, which is that that it's a disincentive for work, and that if people are given money, they won't work. And the assumption to that is that people don't want to. I'm hearing an echo. People, the motive, the idea about that is that people really don't want to work, and that that if they possibly could, they'd lie around, they'd laze around taking drugs all day, and that's the basic goal of human beings. That's what human beings' desire is, and that comes from a fundamental idea that human beings are isolated, atomic individuals whose only goal is physical pleasure. Hedonic is the name of that. So basically, all we want is to have as much physical pleasure as we possibly can, and everything that we do is in service of that goal. But that's not the way human beings are. It's that view is wrong. It's just there's studies that we know. We can look at our neuroscience. I mean, there's absolutely that view is just flat wrong. I mean, there's empirical evidence up the wazoo, and we love to help each other. We like to we need community. Our bodies fall apart if we're not connected to other people. We are connected to each other. I love what Kahil Gibran said about work. He said work is love made visible, and I really see that having good work, doing good work, and making something that is of value to other people is pretty much kind of the one of the best things that we can do. And so people aren't going to not do that. And just on a more um, materialistic level, work is what determines our status, what our job is. And as people's status grows, actually people of higher status have better health and all kinds of different things. I mean, status is something that we seek because we're animals that create hierarchies within ourselves, and being higher in the hierarchy is actually um, it's something we strive for, or some of us strive for, and so that's always going to be happening. So the idea that so I mean I'm telling the argument, but then I'm arguing against myself. So it's an open debate. So I'm going to take both sides. I'm going to argue against. I'm going to. And the other one, the other thing is that the idea that people are just going to take drugs is actually the opposite of what happens. Um, there's research by this neuroscience scientist at Columbia named Carl Hart, and he's shown that to a fairly large degree that taking drugs is adaptive, and that people in really terrible social situations take drugs because they're medicating themselves, and it's actually the same thing to do. I mean, it's actually the most reasonable thing to do in that situation. And when people get universal basic income and they have ways of increasing their status and increasing their well-being, they just stop because they've got better things to do. I mean, when you've got obligations to your families and friends and stuff like that, you don't want to screw it up by being a loser. You just don't. I mean, some people do. I mean, there are a percentage of people, and for that we need to have, you know, treatment and help for them. But the vast majority of people just don't. And so, um, universal basic income will actually solve those problems rather than create those problems. It's the opposite. So I think that the fundamental argument against basic income has to do with the belief that everything that we do is based on our own independent choices, and that actually there's another argument that I'll get to in a second, and that people make bad choices completely on their own, independent of the social situation that they're in. And that's just not what happens. The social situation that we grow up in that's around us, some people just have opportunities and others don't, and that's just the way that it is. And the universal basic income changes that dynamic and allows everybody to have more opportunity, and changes the kinds of opportunity. When people have more opportunities, they make different choices, basically. The other one is the cost, and I think that one of the commenters in the comments made a really good point, and Rob made this earlier too, which is that if the idea is that you just give a check to everybody, it's a lot easier to manage. One of the consequences of universal basic income is more trust in government. And I read this really fascinating book about how in rural towns, the person who decides whether you get welfare or not is one of the most powerful people in the town, and it's very corrupt. So that person um, is there's networks of relationships in the town, and so there's the idea in an Appalachian town. You've got the Hatfields and the McCoys, these families who've been feuding with each other. And so if the person who decides whether you get welfare or not is a McCoy, they don't give welfare to the Hatfields. And so and since this person's a representative of the government, the Hatfields hate the government. And if it's universal basic income and everyone is getting it equally, then that goes away. And if the comment about stigma, if rich people are getting it just the same as everybody, that certainly lowers the stigma. It's much more difficult to to point to somebody and say, well, you're getting it and this person isn't, because that won't be the case. So it's cheaper to administer. So all of those things are for it, but the main things that are against it are the idea that it'll cause people not to work. And you can see that right now because the politicians like Newt Gingrich and some of these people are on and on and on about the reason we have a labor shortage is because they extended unemployment. And people are taking their $300 a month unemployment and lazing about on the beach, taking vacations to Fiji and eating lobster and just generally living it up. And so they don't want to work, and which is, of course, ridiculous. You understand that $300 a month won't even pay rent in the most poorest place. You couldn't even live in a trailer in Alabama for $300 a month. And well, maybe you could, but that, as Rob pointed out, politicians they're going to point at stuff like that. So and then they're going to point at the cost and say it's absolutely impossible for it to do it. But I was just doing it in my head last night, and $700 billion would cover it. And if you look at all of our social services, our defense budget and things like that, or how much we have to spend on medical care, the amount we'd save would make that quite sustainable. So that's what I have to say about it.
Thank you. Now
I think this is closing remarks.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes,
sounds good. Sure. You broke up really badly there. So okay, we're going closing remarks. Donald was absolutely right on socialism. Socialism has two aspects to it: a control of production and control of administration. Programs like Medicare tend to be referred to as light socialism because they don't control production. Programs like the medical program in the UK, where the government owns the medical facilities, would be pure socialism. But the stigma on the word should be subordinated to whether or not the program works and provides what it's intended to provide. And there are benefits to programs like the Veterans Administration that are contained and socialistic, and there are disadvantages as well. This program doesn't control production, but you could certainly see a variant could. I mean, you could have UBI and then put in place a requirement that the money you get from UBI can only be spent on government housing, government stores, and that would turn it into, particularly if the stores were provided by government businesses, that would have been the way the USSR did it. Then you'd have a purely socialist program, but Russia doesn't do that anymore either. Russia's probably probably shows a bastardization of capitalism and corruption right now to extreme levels. It also is, I think, well argued that UBI is a way to correct one of the big problems with capitalism, and that's inequity. And when you get too much inequity in any system, whether it's a system where you've got monarchs or a system where you've got elected representatives, the people that are being disenfranchised tend to revolt. And as the French discovered a century or so ago, that those revolts can be rather painful for the folks that are in power. And my expectation is some of the disenchantment that's going on with China and the balance that they're doing certainly does suggest that they're on a path to rather extreme revolutionary pressure going forward if they're not careful, because their citizens aren't exactly the most content, and Russia's no better. We don't want to go in that direction. What UBI does, that Donald pointed out, can potentially increase the trust in government, certainly reduces inequity, and in a way, it makes a life safer for the very wealthy, because by removing that inequity, their extreme inequity, it may focus more people on improving their lives and less on blaming the very rich for taking advantage of them, and that latter can be problematic for the health and safety of the very rich, because the people that serve them often are on that below poverty level. And honestly, if I were some of those billionaires out there and recognizing that a lot of the people that are preparing my food aren't really very happy with me at the moment, I would probably be preparing my own meals. So what UBI can do is certainly reduce an awful lot of the stress that currently exists between those that don't have and those that do have, particularly those that do have in excess in the environment. So potentially, it's actually a insurance against a future armed revolution that could go against the people that are very wealthy and in power. The big thing, though, with UBI to consider is it really, if implemented, could address the inequity that exists in most capitalistic systems, where the people that aren't working for companies are not paid. And some of those people are doing important jobs. Motherhood should be a job that we value almost above all others, and yet we don't. Teaching by nature is underfunded, and historically so, and shouldn't be. These are jobs that speak to the future of the nation and the future of our own capability. And we've certainly seen where people are below poverty lines in mass, education suffers, health suffers, just simple basics. If you're living on McDonald's hamburgers because all you can afford is a Happy Meal, you're going to have serious health problems when you get along in life, and the government will have to support those health problems, and you'll probably be unable to work and contribute to government. That's a problem that UBI can help fix. I feel very strongly, though, a UBI program should have a parallel program to improve education, to provide the basics so that our populace is better prepared for the money that they will receive. They understand better the options that they have, and they're given better opportunities to work themselves out of poverty as opposed to remain in it. This shouldn't be the idea that it's a static program where a long term we've got large portions of the population that have decided not to work, and that the UBI is enough. It should be a program in concert that moves people out of just living on the UBI. UBI is like a health insurance. It is there when you need it, but it's not intended to be a place where you live in hospitals for the rest of your life. It's only supposed to be able to catch you if you need to be caught. And that means there needs to be significant incentives and programs to move you out of areas where you can't find a job or out of a position where you can't work. And it will give you the opportunity to move from professions and jobs where you are undervalued, abused, treated poorly, and particularly for women who are experiencing massive amounts of misogyny, allow them the freedom to move from hostile relationships, whether they be work relationships or personal relationships, and into situations that are far more beneficial for them and their children. It would seriously improve the lives of those that are disenfranchised and those that are currently falling below the line, particularly children of the of families that are below the line that are punished very unfairly, so it is by nature and should remain an equality program, a program that is focused on providing people with freedom and to deal with some of the core issues in mass that countries deal with, and it's good to know that a number of countries, including the United States, are aggressively looking at these programs with the idea of using them to improve the people that are currently falling below the line.
Thank you, Professor Donald. Do you want to give any concluding remarks?
Sure.
In
I
two
want to say
minutes.
one interesting thing that just happened in California is that it's not quite universal basic income, but they're going to give $1,000 to everybody who under a certain income level that doesn't have a car, which I think is great. I don't have a car, so that'll pay for quite a few Uber rides if I need it, or that's enough to buy a bus, an annual bus pass or transportation pass in Los Angeles, or I think San Francisco. So you that makes your transportation free for a year. So I think
New
that's
York ought to
pretty
do
cool.
that.
Yeah, every place ought to do that. That is pretty cool. I mean, in New York, people don't generally have cars. I mean, it's ridiculous. The New York, they're mostly and San Francisco too. The majority are professional drivers, like taxis and buses and Ubers and delivery people and stuff. But regardless, yeah, I think Rob, has made a lot of most important points, but I do want to add that if you really do the math, it it can I think overall that it winds up being cheaper, not more expensive, and it becomes cheaper for two reasons. One is the point that Rob made about lowering inequity. It's just like if you just visualize the money in society and you visualize most of it being like basically stagnant. Because what winds up happening is if you have $1 billion, you don't want to start companies with it. Starting company is risky. I mean, you have a 90% chance, 80 or 90% chance of losing your money if you start a company. Why would you do that? I mean, that's ridiculous. You can invest, you can take your money and put it in to trading systems in New York that make money by uh, creating futures markets that work by buying and selling and using the microseconds between the sale and the price change um, by through the communications equipment that allow you to just grow your money, and it just happens. You don't even have to do anything. You just sit there and your money grows, and it's guaranteed. So why do anything with your money? It just grows and grows and grows. But this particular system would take that money and it would distribute it out to the society, so the people in the society could be using it. And what Rob said is 100% true, because I've seen many papers and books that show that when a society gets to a certain point of inequality, that it collapses. It's just every single solitary time. It's not. It cannot sustain itself, and I'm worried that the United States is getting close to that point, and we it, it's people are so feeling so disenfranchised, they're actually getting violent, which is not a good thing. And so universal basic income is a way of making a huge difference in making that problem, actually not possible. which is just at the core one of its fundamental values. And then again, as Rob pointed out, the value of having a safety net is it's psychologically healthy, it's sociologically healthy, it's health, and it makes you trust the government more, it makes you trust each other more. It's just it's something that I think is it's absolutely not just good but 100% necessary. So thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you. Thank you. This is really great debate, and hopefully, we can do more research on policy and we can work together on that particular point. And it's a great learning for developing nations. Thank you, everyone. I request all of our audience please share our content as much as possible with your government agencies, corporation, and academia. Thank you. Bye bye, and take care.